To your question on, China stood up, Turkey stood up and supported Pakistan. What about other countries? I think as the world's third largest economy, I don't think we necessarily need, a whole bunch of people saying we support India. The fact that we were able to do what we said we would do and demonstrate it to the world, I think stands for itself. But yes, I do take the point that we should have, fairly strong global outreach platform by now. I think we have already lost a lot of time. I think that needs to be addressed.
Hello and welcome. You're with Strat News Global and this is The Gist. I'm Ketki Angre. On the show, we have a very special guest with us today, Shashi Shekhar Vempati. He is the former CEO of Prasar Bharati. And we are going to talk about Operation Sindoor, what happened before it, what happened during Operation Sindoor, and also the learnings from it after, especially as far as information is concerned. We've of course seen a lot of misinformation, disinformation too. But I want to start by asking you, for you, what were your big takeaways from what you've seen during and before Operation Sindoor in terms of the multitude of actors at play in the information spectrum and also the many different layers at which information was operating?
Right. No, I think this is a very unique moment in modern Indian history, right, where we've had other conflicts in the past, but the citizens were largely passive. They were just observing or consuming whatever was available. And this is one instance where the citizens were actively involved in what unfolded. And in some cases, they were also witness to the actual conflict itself, right? So in that sense, it's a very complex information theater. As you rightly pointed out, multiple actors, technology playing a role, and different audiences, and it went through different phases, right? The phase after the Pahalgam terror attack, and then, of course, what happened when India struck back, and then the 3 days that followed from there. And then, of course, it's continuing to happen now. In fact, the other day I was just telling someone that there may have been cessation of hostilities on the ground or on the field, but the information warfare continues. So there is no pause on as far as Operation Sindoor's information dimension is concerned, because that's unfolding even today.
And that's what is so important. When you talk about information, we're actually talking about how the world perceives you as a country, how the world perceives your media, how the world perceives how you have understood the conflict, where your place is in the conflict, and how you have responded. And like you said, this continues for much after those 4 days.
Right.
And in that sense, I want to first start with pre-Operation Sindoor. There was a lot of anticipation, of course, and even the Prime Minister was actually at an event in Mumbai. So there was a build-up, everybody sort of felt it. But how did you think we handled the information dissemination during that period?
So in fact, that was a very interesting period, right? Because earlier you had the Uri surgical strike, where we learnt of it much later. Then you had the Balakot strikes, where you pretty much learned the next morning, but you didn't really know what exactly happened, right? And then you had this Pahalgam terror attack, and the expectations were very high. And today, with this era of social media, where there is so much of conversation and so much of anticipation, the expectations that the government would do X or Y, or it will do a final settlement, this will be the end of everything. So there was tremendous build-up in terms of public anticipation on what is India likely to do. Now that is one aspect. Then you look at the government, what they did. They kept everyone guessing, right? You would have these series of meetings, someone going to LKM, someone going to Racecourse Road, everything was breaking news. So it created a sense of, a lot of speculation, a lot of guessing. It kept everyone, confused on what exactly is the government going to do, right? And then you had the first move, which was, that visas will be cancelled, people will be asked to go back. Things started to unfold, and then the big decision on, Indus Waters Treaty, right? Which was, a substantial geopolitical shift. And then, as you rightly pointed out, in the middle of all this, you had this international event in Mumbai, which the Prime Minister came to. And if you recall, the Prime Minister gave one speech in Bihar where he expressed anger, and he addressed the audience in English, knowing fully well that the world is watching, right? And then after that, there was Mann Ki Baat, where he again echoed, the sentiments of the country. And then he comes to this international event in Mumbai. I was there as well. And it's an international media event, interestingly. And you have audiences from, all over the world. And he talked about how India is, emerging as a creative hub and so on. And then he comes back to Delhi, addresses this news conclave where he says that for the first time he comments on the Indus Waters Treaty, saying that we can't have terror and water, flowing together, and India's waters will flow only for India's interests, right? And the UK free trade agreement was announced, so everyone thinks, maybe this is it, maybe nothing much is going to happen, and then all of a sudden you wake up the next morning and these strikes have happened. So in that sense, I think India managed the information theater fairly well, keeping at ease the global audience that had come to India, made sure that event went successfully, and demonstrated that we had the capacity to both host international events and also secure our national interest.
Okay. Coming to Operation Sindoor itself, like you said, we woke up and suddenly some action has happened, and now we are going to get a briefing, and that's when they decide that the briefing will be done by women military officers.
Right.
And take us through some of that symbolism, because it's so powerful.
Right. I think this goes to the creative genius of the Prime Minister, who I believe came up with that formulation of Operation Sindoor, where it was a very emotive statement. It was to apply a balm to those women who lost their husbands. Some of them just barely married a few weeks, and to say that we have not forgotten what you have suffered, and we will make sure that those who perpetrated this, including their masters, their sponsors, will be held to account. Right. That was a promise that the Prime Minister had made, and so when you woke up that morning, you saw that action was taken on that front. So the framing of the operation and the messengers who delivered the details of that operation, the two lady officers, I think there was not only there was symbolism there in terms of Sindoor, but also it was a repudiation of everything that the idea of Pakistan stood for. Right. So in that sense, it was a brilliant combination of both the message in terms of what Operation Sindoor meant and the messengers who delivered that.
Okay. I want to quote from a recent column that you had written. And this is where I think there is some concern about some of the missteps and some of the missteps that happened at a pretty large scale, given that India has some 450 private channels that actually disseminate news, and 200 million households where television is watched.
Right.
And so we're looking at a massive scale, and in that there was fake news, there was a lot of chest thumping, and some of this you cannot walk back from.
Right.
Because in a matter of time that this just turned out to be completely false. So I'm going to read something that you've written.
Sure.
The barrage of fake news while active operations were on was also a reflection on the sorry state of affairs of India's electronic media, with hyperventilating TV news anchors embarrassing themselves in prime time. And as much as we talk about, the good things that happen as far as information dissemination is concerned, it's important that we also address this.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think the events, the way they unfolded in real time, brought home the fact that not only is it important to manage the narrative, but also you have to manage the expectations, because the expectations were raised so high with all the the rhetoric that was being delivered in the TV studios. That also created the spiral, the cycle between what was going on in the social media, what was happening in the TV studios, and it led to this hyperventilation. I recall the one specific instance where there were these drone attacks going on in Jammu. There was a blackout. There was this reporter live on TV, and he was almost having a panic attack. I mean, why were they having him live on air? They should have taken him off air, right? And then there were these 2 or 3 reports which are completely false, right? Like the terrorist attack on Udhampur, or the fact that tanks were marching towards Jaisalmer border. I mean, all of these were negated by the government's fact check unit. So I think these were things where clearly India's electronic media needed to go back.
In fact, one about Pakistani jets being down, their pilots in our custody, them being arrested, INS Vikrant deployed, half of Karachi is gone and disappeared.
Right. Well, so there are two aspects here, right? One is misinformation as far as creating panic in India is concerned, and creating putting out things that didn't happen in India. That is serious. Then there's the other dimension, which is perhaps also deliberate, which is disinformation, where you want to confuse the enemy, you want to create confusion, you want to create all sorts of news out there, so that they are grappling with these issues. So to the extent that perhaps Indian media carried disinformation, I think is okay. I don't see that it's a legitimate, because it is a conflict and this is a legitimate act as far as India is concerned. But where misinformation is concerned, where things didn't happen in India and which were wrongly reported, which created panic, I think that is where they need to definitely go back and take a look at what happened.
And as someone who, I think, particularly on 2 nights where there was a lot of action, yes, you cannot get live operational details immediately. And I think from 26/11, now some TV channels have learnt,
Right.
and they have started tagging things, saying these are deferred visuals, they're not live, we're not going to show you any action, stuff like that. But there's also the very real problem of your own audience not knowing
Exactly.
what's happening.
Well, also there's the other dimension, right, where especially those in the conflict zones who are seeing the drones being brought down, they are going to use their mobile phones, they are going to make videos, they are going to put it on social media. So how do you get around this? I think this is something that we really have to figure out. I don't think there's a clear answer there, because it is not merely about showing live visuals of what's happening, but how do you manage the information theater in this era where the citizens are equally participants, and so how do you navigate this entire thing? I think this is something that we seriously need to go back and think about.
Actually, that's something I wanted to ask you about, because see, with social media, someone who till a few years ago would have been a passive audience,
Right.
is now, like you said, an active participant, sometimes unwittingly so.
Correct.
And we are now in the age of AI. So it's already difficult for a lot of people to make out the difference between real and fake.
Yes.
And here there is something which is coming to you and it's being disseminated as information, as fact. And on the other hand, you're seeing not much information sometimes coming in through official sources. How do you reconcile the two? How do you get your audience to sort of understand that there are some limitations to what we do, but there's also something that they need to also inherently learn about how social media operates?
Yeah, I think you raised a very important point. In fact, this conflict was something we, while there was a lot of anticipation and speculation on what will happen, I think everyone thought it's something that's going to happen somewhere else, right? It's not going to concern us like in the past. It's not something that but this is the first time. In fact, in my adult life, I don't ever recall blackouts. And this is the first time we are seeing blackouts, right? We are seeing sirens going off. So I don't think the citizens were prepared enough in terms of what it means to, how should they conduct themselves during such a conflict period, right? So it's not only about civil defense, it's not only about safety and blackouts and sirens and so on. It is also about how to conduct yourself in the information domain. I think it requires education, it requires training. I think we need to seriously think about what are the do's and don'ts when something like this happens. Often we've seen that when there is a breakdown in law and order, or for example during 370 when it was repealed in Kashmir, internet was suspended, right? Now let's say you did suspend internet. How will you ensure that the right information gets to the citizen? In fact, that's something that I've also mentioned in my column, that now there is technology which can enable you to do that, right? So we need to look at all of these aspects.
Actually, I remember when there was a mock drill, there was someone who in the blackout was happily taking selfies. Then there was someone else who, when there were sirens and there were actually either drones or there was something happening in the location that they were in, it was in the border area, they were actually recording a selfie video, completely oblivious to how serious the situation was.
Yeah. And it is serious, right? Because if you look at the shelling, it is not just ordinary citizens, right? Some officials also became victims of the shelling.
Yes.
So this is real and this is serious.
Also, there's I want to come to the direct to mobile broadcast issue slightly later. But before that, I want to ask you about, India used very effectively our ambassadors in different countries before we launched Operation Sindoor.
Right.
One thing that did stand out after Operation Sindoor is also how India did not get a very open and vocal support from different countries.
Right.
While on the other hand, China said it is supporting Pakistan. Turkey said it is supporting Pakistan. Do you think that's a dimension that we probably need to do more in?
Yeah, I think there are multiple aspects to what happened in the international domain, right? You had these series of articles trying to hype up the performance of Chinese weapon systems, and then not only it was about hyping up the Chinese weapon system, it was also raising doubts and questions on Indian Air Force's abilities. Why is Indian Air Force so performing so poorly? So this narrative was built in international media. And I was surprised because I would see these articles then being echoed back on WhatsApp groups, especially from where the diaspora, people from in the US or other places quoting these articles and feeling extremely dejected that everything is lost. What is wrong? We've completely lost the game, right? So clearly on the international front, there was a need for us to have managed the narrative better. I don't think there's an easy solution to that. Because if you look at the way China has cultivated influence, and there's fairly well researched reports on this in terms of Chinese influence operations, it takes multiple levels, right? You have to penetrate these institutions, you have to have friendly journalists. In fact, someone compiled a list of all the articles in Reuters, CNN, Guardian, and so on, and you look at the names, there's a very clear pattern there, there's a clear profile there, right? So that is a big gap in terms of our outreach through the established media channels. Also, it is important to recognize there were fairly powerful lobbies here. The Chinese defense lobby, the American defense lobby, the European. So all of them have their interests as well, and that is also reflected on the kind of reporting that happened. To your question on China stood up, Turkey stood up and supported Pakistan. What about other countries? I think as the world's third largest economy, I don't think we necessarily need a whole bunch of people saying we support India. The fact that we were able to do what we said we would do and demonstrate it to the world, I think stands for itself. But yes, I do take the point that we should have fairly strong global outreach platform by now. I think we have already lost a lot of time. I think that needs to be addressed.
Okay. And then coming back to informing our own people. Because see, your diaspora already is your diaspora. They are going to be in favor of you. But there is this whole other dimension, and at multiple levels again, where they need to hear somebody, they need to have access to somebody who can put forth your point of view in another country. And it may not always be, the diaspora coming forward.
Correct.
And in that sense, you said that yes, we've already lost time. But what more can we do there? Because that is, like you said, the information theatre continues.
Absolutely. I think we'll have to tackle it at multiple levels, right? One is perhaps more deeper engagement with the various policy making institutions, have more chairs of India studies, more fellows, and continuously engage with them. So you have a diversity of voices who are well informed and who know what is the right perspective to put out there, and they have all the facts and figures to put that perspective. So that is one aspect. Second, I think is an area of weakness which we probably should have addressed a while back. Is if you look at a lot of the international media platforms, a lot of their staff study at these global media schools, right? And I think that is an area where we have not really paid attention to. So we need to look at how do we engage better with these global media schools, so that those who are coming out of those schools and who are joining these various global media outlets again get the right perspective. Today they are not getting that right perspective. So that's probably the second thing that we should look at. Third is of course building an international media platform. And for being the world's largest democracy, a billion people democracy, and the third largest economy soon, we clearly don't have a global media platform, and I think that's a big gap, significant gap that needs to be addressed.
Okay. And on your suggestion on fast tracking direct to mobile broadcast, if you could explain to our audience, what does that mean and how do you think it will help?
Well, so traditionally, if you, at least my generation, when we were growing up, television was terrestrial, and you had these rooftop antenna systems where you would get TV signals and so on. Right now, we have completely passed that era. We went to cable, satellite, now on mobile phones and internet, we're consuming all our content. Now, when a disaster occurs, when an emergency strikes, when there are situations where your telecom networks are either down or they're choked up, how do you ensure that you are able to get your message out of, in public interest or in national interest to the citizens where it matters, when it matters, on a device where they're available. Because it's no good to have a broadcast on satellite or on terrestrial TV because nobody is watching it. But if I have a mechanism by which, using the terrestrial broadcast frequencies, if I can reach every mobile phone, then I can deliver messages of public and national importance. And we saw that during COVID as well, right? When the so much of misinformation, and the Prime Minister had to go out and give these important speeches, right? So today there is technology available. In fact, it is indigenous, made in India, designed in India, where a chip that has been designed by this startup in Bangalore called Sankhya Labs. That chip, if it's embedded in a mobile phone, the mobile phone can receive broadcast signals and with no dependency on internet, no dependency on internet platforms, big tech or foreign platforms. In fact, just rewind back to the Ukraine-Russia conflict. Out of the blue, one day, YouTube just shut off Russia RT, right? So you don't want a situation where on the internet, you're fully dependent on foreign platforms and algorithms to get information of public and national interest. You need a mechanism by which, irrespective of whether internet is up or not, telecom networks are up or not, whether the foreign platforms are friendly or not, you can still get your message to the mobile phones directly using this technology. So that requires the government to build out this network. Perhaps maybe there is a private-public model that the government can explore. But if we can get these chips to mobile phones in India, then you have an alternate mechanism by which you can reach the citizens no matter what.
Okay. I also want to ask you about, do we have anything like a press war room? Is that something that we have, or is that?
Good question. I don't know. I'm not privy to that. Though I do know that, especially on the fact check side, there is something similar, right? In fact, this was set up some time back during COVID when this avalanche of misinformation was hitting us. So there's this Press Information Bureau's fact check unit. The public broadcaster also had a similar parallel team, and they would coordinate in real time, put out fact checks whether something is wrong, something is false, fake news, putting out the right information. So I think that mechanism does definitely exist. What I'm not privy to is is there an offensive mechanism as well in terms of not just being defensive about what is wrong, but also maybe offensively putting out information that perhaps is required in that moment. Maybe some of it is disinformation deliberately, maybe some of it is important information, but I don't know if there is such a mechanism. Maybe there is one.
Okay. And my final question is on a question of credibility. And in that sense, there was a lot of super loss of credibility at a very large mass media platform scale. And that's something like reputation built over years but can be lost in seconds. And there, how do you see us building that out?
I think that's a much bigger problem, because to a large extent, the news media, especially the news TV channels, have ceased to be news channels, right? They're largely views channels, and the loss of credibility that you're referring to largely comes from the fact that they're all doing opinion making. They're having these discussions and debates, most of which don't have to be backed up by anything because it's your opinion, right? And I think that is where the problem lies. If they were to dedicate a significant time of their programming to actual hard news, the way it was traditionally delivered, which the public broadcaster, DD News or AIR News, continue to do, then I think the element of balance would have come there and the credibility would have been solved. The other thing is the manner in which these shows were being conducted, right? Just that sheer hyperventilation, when if let's say events were unfolding in real time, you should be far more sober. I recall in being in the US on 9/11 when the plane struck World Trade Center, the tone in which the anchors were presenting was very sober, very somber, and very serious. There was no frivolous, no hyperventilation. It was, putting out the facts and basically having a calming effect on the audience, despite what tragedy was unfolding. I didn't see that across any of our studios, and I think that is a big gap.
And as a follow-up to that, when you don't have this calm, composed, sort of reassuring voice, then people are going to turn to the WhatsApp University. Correct. Or options which they probably find soothing. They may be completely fake. They might find soothing. what happens in that case if they are going to be unchecked? It's only an incentive for more engagement farming.
Right. Absolutely. And I think this is perhaps where there has to be, like we discussed earlier in the conversation, that there are some do's and don'ts for the citizens, also some do's and don'ts for how the news media needs to conduct itself while active events are unfolding. I think this is something that perhaps the government and the media need to come together and put in place.
All right, thank you so much for your time. Tremendous food for thought here. A lot that we did right, but definitely a lot of lessons that can be learned across the board in terms of how information is disseminated, information is consumed, information is shared as well. Thank you so much for joining us on The Gist. Keep watching Strat News Global.